Hello, class. I hope that you have been enjoying reading this textbook and your observations that you've been doing with your classes. I've really enjoyed reading your reflections, your discussion boards, and conversations between each other and learning a lot. If possible, can you go ahead and describe the class that you are observing during your reflection or discussion so it will help the reader, either me or your classmates, get a better understanding of who you are observing. Hopefully this chapter and chapter 9, teaching students with learning disabilities, will help guide you in your observations and some things to be looking for that the teacher is doing, or that you can see how their strategies that students are getting in the classroom. The chapter begins by talking about how to recognize students with a learning disability, and then it goes into talking about assessments to figure out if they do have a learning disability. And then the chapter also gives lots of great ideas of how to help students with learning disabilities, and those ideas really help with all students in a way, so they're great strategies. This week for chapter 9, you're doing a quiz. So as we go through talk about the chapter, I'm going to kind of highlight some of the things that you might see on the quiz, or give you a little heads up on what you might need to focus on as we go through. So I'm going to try to do that this week. So indicators of a learning disability. This is one of the most difficult disabilities to define. So the text starts with talking about how students with disabilities kind of fall into two categories. Either you're noticing that they aren't quite grasping information that their classmates are grasping, maybe falling behind, or it takes them a little bit long to get that. Another thing is that you're seeing inconsistencies. Maybe they're really struggling in reading but succeeding high in math, or the opposite way. And that is, as a general education teacher, I see that the most with students with learning disabilities, especially ones with reading, maybe dyslexia. As their math teacher, I'm seeing them excel in math, and then they struggle more on the English language arts side. So that is very common. And then most indicators of learning disabilities are noticed during the early elementary grades. So really, I want to kind of highlight on that really elementary grades, not always the early ones, because if students are too young, like some of you are observing pre-K, kindergarten classes, and those children still haven't quite matured yet, and so it's hard to tell a difference between maturity and a learning disability. So I kind of would stick more with the elementary grades later on, once students have had a chance to get comfortable in the school setting, and then they can. But I do have to say that being able to catch the learning disability, the earlier you can catch it, the better. So then you can start putting practice in place and the accommodations they need in place earlier, so then hopefully that you can give them the skills they need to learn how to live with the learning disability or overcome that learning disability. So major indicators of a learning disability: students appear capable, this is what I was just saying, experience extreme difficulty in certain areas, and then this one, variations in performance. That's a big one that I notice. And then ineffective learning strategies. So, and the ineffective learning strategy, this is when students, like maybe average achiever students, are able to know that they need to practice something over and over again to achieve it, and then they're able to learn it. But students with learning disabilities have a harder time doing that. One key thing on page 175, it talks about inactive learners, and that's what Torgerson called, because they had failed to become actively involved in the learning task. He called them inactive learners. The chapter then goes on to talk about if you have a student that you feel might have a learning disability, you can go through the assessment procedures and an information gathering process that includes both formal testing and informal procedures such as observation, inventories, and work samples. And this goes into you as a general education teacher will be their number one, being able to gather up all of this information for the students. You'll be the one observing, you'll be the one gathering all of the classwork that you've done or the tests to show. You'll be the one doing some of that tier 2 that we've been talking about in the RTI, where you'll do tutoring or small group with the student and showing that what you're trying to do isn't helping, that they need further accommodations and further help. And so then you'll gather information about the student's current intellectual functioning. They talk about giving an IQ test, academic achievement, performance in areas related to disability, information processing, and strategies for learning. So when you're gathering up information for a student and when the special education team is working together to test the student, they are testing more in the intellectual functioning, the IQ, their academic achievement, their performance areas, more academic and not necessarily strategies for learning or how the student is learning. They're not always looking and providing assessments for that. Some assessment data that they might be receiving is the IQ score in the low average range. And then regarding the IQ is that students with learning disabilities show a discrepancy between the average intellectual performance and poor academic skills. That's saying that they looked at the IQ of a student, and then if they were not performing at the level that their IQ tested that they should be performing, then it showed that they needed some more accommodations, that they actually have the ability in their IQ to perform the tasks. They just need the extra help to do that. And then going back to the IDEA 2004 states that schools are not required to document a discrepancy. So they used to not allow certain students into special education if their IQ was low and they were struggling also, they would say that there was no need for special education. But if you're showing a need for it, then students can have accommodations. One test that they can do is determining reading levels. You can do oral sample reading. Pay very close attention to this close procedure. It talks about that in more detail on page 178. That'll be something to look at closely and read about. And close is where you're giving maybe notes to a student and you take out a few of the words and students fill in the blanks. Instead of having to write every single thing down, they're filling in parts of it. Maybe like every 5th word is a blank and they can fill it in. And then informal reading inventories. This is used a lot, especially in elementary, when teachers are reading one-on-one with a student to find their exact reading level. And they usually do it at least beginning, middle, and end of the year. I saw in your reflections that many of you talked about how your teacher progress monitored the beginning, middle, and end of the year. I feel like if their students are struggling, then you can do these informal reading inventories as needed, throughout to see, especially if students are getting service through dyslexia, maybe different programs that help with dyslexia students like Take Flight. They do these IRIs more often, and then we have students who are in the tier 2 that do a specific reading plan, and they give them IRIs like every other week just to see their growth. So the more a student is struggling, the more I would give these to students. And then the text goes into more detail about readability measures. And then special services. When the assessment is complete, the team meets, and then that's when they decide what the student is needing. And prevalence and characteristics, just going through some of the statistics about it. Classroom adaptations is the next section. This is going to be a really big part for you as a general education teacher of how to set up your class for students with learning disabilities.